Teal Swan is a master of the word salad, a string of seemingly random and unintelligible words all strung together in such a way that makes her seem wise, deep, like she's channeling a message from source energy. She would likely tell you that that's exactly what she's doing. After all, she knows all the secrets of the universe, and for many people, what she says really seems to resonate. But, like we say with all cultic groups, there's always something good on the surface. There's always something that speaks to people who end up following the ideology. But as we've been peeling back the layers and have seen Teal's mask slip throughout the years, it becomes clear that Teal likely isn't channeling anything at all. In fact, like most cult leaders, she's targeting and exploiting some of the world's most vulnerable people who will look at her as if she's their savior. So today, we are going to take a look at some of Teal's beliefs, her practices, and even expose her plagiarism. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of my Teal Swan deep dive. I cannot believe we're here. Whether you are returning or brand new, I am so happy to have you here. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. If you're interested in any of these topics, please like, subscribe, do all the social media things because I would absolutely love to have you here. Last week, we did a deep dive into the Satanic Panic, Barbara Snow, and the role these things both played in Teal's life. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend watching or listening to the previous 2 episodes to make sure that you have the context you need for this episode. The link will be in the description for those watching on YouTube. And before we jump in, I would like to offer some disclaimers. This piece is for entertainment purposes only. It is not meant to malign anyone from any person, group, or organization or entity, and I certainly am not diagnosing anyone. My opinions, speculations, and analysis will be sprinkled throughout this recording, so please know that anything I said that isn't corroborated by other sources is just my opinion or simply speculation. Even if it is corroborated by another source, please don't take anything as fact. And please make sure to always do your own research. I am sharing all of this information to the best of my understanding, so if I did misinterpret anything, please let me know. Viewer discretion is also advised. There will be talks of child abuse. There will also be some heavy discussions about unaliving and mental health in this episode. So, if any of these topics feel triggering, I highly recommend you skip this episode and just take care of yourself. Also, I am not a therapist or counselor. I am just a curious person on the internet who's fascinated by human behavior, so I might get things wrong here. So please always do your own research. And if you are someone in the mental health field or have experience with this, please feel free to drop your knowledge in the comments. Please provide corrections and clarifications to anything that I might get wrong. And I'm trying to communicate my points to the best of my abilities. And so I'm sorry if anything feels murky or miscommunicated. My purpose with this episode and this whole series really is to expose the dangerous and problematic practices and teachings that Teal Swan promotes to try to help the people that she's targeting. If you're someone who is having unaliving ideation or are feeling hopeless, I'll leave some resources in the pinned comment down below. But if you do need support right now, please dial 988 to be connected to the Unaliving and Crisis Lifeline right away. I will never forget the day I got the call. I was in college, working my college job, when I received a call from my best friend. We never called each other, so immediately I knew something was wrong. Even to this day, about 18 years later, we do not call each other. We only text and video chat. We've just made too many bad phone calls to each other over the years to ever actually call one another now. Our friend had been missing for a couple of days. He was a party animal and always the life of the party. When you were around him, you just knew it was going to be loud, fun, and exciting. He brought this positive energy everywhere he went. And so when we hadn't heard from him for a few days, we thought, okay, maybe he just met a boy and stayed over there where he partied a little too hard and crashed somewhere. None of us expected that we would ever get a call like the one I received. When I heard my best friend's voice, I immediately knew something was wrong. And she just said, "Josh killed himself." And I was shocked. I didn't even think she was talking about the right Josh, because the fun-loving drag queen I knew would have never done something like that. He made all of our days so much better when we saw him. So I literally asked her if it was a different Josh, but she confirmed it was our beloved friend. He was found by his own sister, and to say that all of us, his friends, were absolutely shocked is an understatement. I remember just falling to the floor in the middle of the restaurant I was working at. It just felt like time had stopped. After we found this out, the thing we kept saying to each other was, "I just wish I had known. I wish he had told us that he felt this bad. I wish I had been a better friend. I wish I'd been less self involved. Maybe if I had picked up on something, my friend would still be here. Maybe if he trusted me enough to talk to me, I could have done something. I could have helped him or supported him." When something like this happens, you feel so many feelings: sadness, shame, guilt, anger at them and at yourself. And after that happened, I vowed to always drop anything and everything if I knew someone I loved needed me, to make sure that the people that I love know that they can trust me with their darkest feelings and emotions. I would have loved to make sure Josh knew how special and important he was to me and just how much we valued him. What I would never have wanted to happen was for him or anyone I know who's having similar thoughts or feelings or impulses to ever come across one of Teal Swan's videos. Teal Swan has made a career targeting people like Josh, people who don't know where else to turn, people who don't know who to reach out to, who would really understand them. There was a time when I felt very, very depressed and I had some unaliving ideation myself. And I remember feeling so much shame around having those feelings at all. It was like I was already feeling bad enough, and then I'm feeling worse because I'm feeling guilty for having these feelings that I know I shouldn't be having. And I didn't know who I could turn to talk about them. And if I told someone, would they tell other people? Would they even take it seriously? Or would they just discount my feelings? Would I just end up being embarrassed? These feelings are just so isolating and confusing, and it is so vulnerable to actually say the words out loud and admit that you've been having these feelings and impulses. And in America, insurance doesn't always cover therapy, and for a long time it was almost like frowned upon to seek out counseling. It was like people thought if you had a therapist that something was quote unquote wrong with you. So, what do people do when they feel like they have no other options? Well, nowadays, we turn to the internet, the trusty algorithm that guides us to the answers that we're looking for. And if you're Teal Swan, you know exactly how to manipulate that algorithm to make sure that anyone who types in a question about hopelessness or unaliving finds your channel. Because, hey, she's the expert on human suffering, isn't she? Teal Swan's net worth is at or close to $1 million, according to online resources. It's been estimated that she makes around $30,000 a month and around $360,000 annually, all by preying on people who are just trying to find answers to life's most unanswerable questions. She would say that she just wants to heal all suffering. But many have shared and speculated that she's actually causing more harm than good. At first glance, I think we can all see how and why so many people are drawn to Teal Swan. She tells it as she sees it with this tough love attitude. And I'll admit, some of the things she's said, the little snippets of her seminars and clips that you see on Instagram that I've seen throughout the years, they have resonated with me before. But it's like we say with all cults, there is always something good that followers are getting out of the group or the teachings. That's why they have a following. I'm not here to say that it's all hogwash, that certain spiritual practices and techniques aren't helpful to people. Some things are. However, I am here to say that most of it, when it comes to Teal, is either detrimental to us or is just stolen concepts she's repackaged to fit her perspective and her image. Furthermore, some of it is straight up plagiarized. If there's one thing I've learned during my time exploring cults, it's that they're really all the same. There's no real new ideas. They're just these ideas that have been known for centuries, if not thousands of years, that are repackaged into some new spiritual practice or religion, and Teal is truly no exception. So let's go ahead and explore some of her beliefs. Like many cult leaders and spiritual leaders before her, Teal claims to have extrasensory abilities. She says that at a young age, she knew she was different. And although we've discussed how when she was a young girl, she actually was seeking out a diagnosis from mental health professionals and within mental health textbooks, and she seemed to be enamored with characters who could be described as sociopaths. She now claims that she was talking to spirits and people didn't get her. And how dare someone in the mental health profession just try to diagnose her and have her pop some pills? And as someone who's been recently diagnosed with anxiety and does take daily medication, I can attest that for me, anyways, it has been utterly life changing and I wish I'd done it sooner. But to be honest, I did believe in the stigma that if you took medication for mental health, something was quote unquote wrong with you. And I was really afraid to face that for a really long time. And I really wish I'd done it a decade ago. Certain parts of my life would have been so much simpler and easier if I had just sought out the help that I needed when I truly needed it. Teal, however, approaches a lot of her teachings as if they are the ultimate truth. She's even claimed to have full and total access to the Akashic records, which, if you've never heard of this concept, it's the spiritual idea that every single, and I mean every single thought, emotion, word, and event that has ever been made or has occurred by anyone in the entire universe, past, present, or future, human or non human, has essentially been cataloged on a non physical plane. It's basically, according to Teal, the genetic code of the entirety of existence, and it encompasses everything and anything resembling the universe itself. And Teal apparently has access to all of it. So, yeah, of course, she knows everything about everything that has been or will be, including every single thought that you've ever had, and also every illness that you may have in the future or have had in your past or a past life. Okay. So I guess this mixed with her, I mean, we can't really call it transparency, can we? But this mixed with her alleged lies about satanic ritual abuse, it invokes a sense of trust in the people who follow her, especially if they have a history of actually being themselves. It all resonates with them. They trust her. She knows the secrets to universal happiness. And this gives her followers a false sense of comfort and openness and understanding. It might inspire them to listen to her more intensely and immerse themselves in her world because she is there to heal them. If they can just get a moment with Teal, she would be able to look at them and know exactly what they need because she can see every moment, every thought, every illness they've ever experienced in their life or previous ones. And they all know she's capable of this because she was able to heal herself. And she experienced trauma greater than any of her followers could ever imagine. But, and Teal kind of says this without saying it, in my opinion, but if you haven't experienced the level of that Teal has experienced, then you have no right to say to her what concepts are healing and what aren't. Because who else in the world is going to be willing to share or lie about getting, I don't know, sewn into a corpse? If she can handle that kind of trauma and heal it from her completion process, but you can't heal yours, well, then the problem certainly couldn't be the process itself. It must be you. And this is the kind of arrogant stance she has on her critics or with people who disagree with her and her teachings. It's very much like the, well, because I told you so trope of a mother responding to a child asking a question. There's just no debate. And if you don't agree with Teal or you're not willing to accept what she is saying is true, then you're wrong and you are just unwilling to work on yourself. She has literally said that if her completion process doesn't work on you, well, then you just must not really want to heal. You must not want to be there at her retreat if it doesn't work for you. And that's a you problem. And this is a classic cult leader approach to conflict. She goes on the attack rather than discusses a different option that might work better for someone. A licensed therapist might offer a modality of healing, and if that doesn't work for their client, they might offer a different option or even a different professional. Or at least I'd hope they would. And just to share an anecdote here, I have been there when I've done all of the yoga, all of the breath work, all of the journaling, listening to these people like Teal, exercising, cleaning up my diet. And I just remember getting so frustrated that I was not feeling better. I completely subscribed to law of attraction ideology at one point, and I tried to always expect the best. And then when those things didn't happen, my fall into depression or sadness was even steeper because I had put my expectations up so high. So I had a lot further to fall down. I had to start being really honest with myself and not just temper my expectations, but what's helped me a lot has been getting truly diagnosed and taking medication to help with that diagnosis. And for me, it's been a day and night experience. I tried for years to do it the spiritual way. And I'm not saying that what worked for me will work for you. Everyone's path is different. But I am saying it's very dangerous to just blindly follow some online guru because they do not necessarily know what they're talking about. They want to get clicks and they want to get views and they want to make money. They want to get you to pay for whatever BS they're shilling. I mean, Teal charges $5,000 for her retreats because, she's just so valuable. She can see the problem within you before you can, whether it's a mental or emotional or even physical challenge. She literally claims that she can look at someone's body and tell them what their ailment might be. She, Teal Swan, is literally the solution to every problem that the Akashic records might ever see. So don't pay $100 a session for a therapist. Just pay $5,000 to go to a retreat for a week so you can go home with absolutely no tangible tools on how to make your life better on a day-to-day basis. You're probably not going to feel good again until you pay all that money for yet another retreat. And this is the cycle that's so easier for followers of really any spiritual guru to fall into, where people only feel good if they are in the vicinity of that guru. But when they go back home, they can't seem to have that same experience. They don't have any modalities, tools, understanding of how to actually and effectively and efficiently deal with their feelings, their triggers. They just like being around Teal. Their hands are being held at this retreat and they're not given any real or proper tools to deal with the challenges when they face them once they leave their guru's presence, once they go back home. They simply aren't getting any tools that they can really bring home with them to continue their growth and their connection to their inner self. Instead, they have no more guidance. They're thrown back out into the world, and all they can do is watch Teal on their computer and save up for the next retreat when they can feel good again. And it's just funny to me because if Teal truly had all this knowledge, if she had access to these Akashic records and could talk to ghosts and was aware of all your past lives and knew the answer to every single question a person might ever have, then why does anyone ever need to ask her a question? Teal has these seminars where she rents out a space like a big theater and she sits on what could be described as a throne, and she has audience participants volunteer to come up on the stage and ask a question in an effort to show off her wisdom and her abilities. But Teal, if you're so all knowing, couldn't you just look at someone and intuit what they're going to ask you? And you know the answer to every question that has ever been asked or ever will be asked, yet you demand that hurt, vulnerable people seeking healing come up and ask you their vulnerable questions themselves in front of a room of 100 people. Why not just stand up there, point to someone, and share wisdom that way? Do you know why? Because a part of the fact that she possesses none of these special magical abilities, this makes groups of people immediately bond. Sharing trauma in an open setting like this and being this vulnerable creates a false sense of security inside our minds because we see others being so vulnerable and being guided and being accepted. It makes us feel more comfortable doing the same. It opens us up to go deeper within ourselves and once again invokes this feeling of trusting Teal. And not only that, it causes us to lower our guard and our boundaries. When I was involved in the cult that I was in, I share my story here if you'd like to see it or listen to it. We would share in a group setting. And some of the things I heard people share were very disturbing and also illegal. They were violating and deeply, deeply concerning. And I remember feeling so uncomfortable, but then thinking, well, they feel bad about it and they're here and they want to grow and they want to change and they're being vulnerable enough to share it. So I guess I just shouldn't be so judgmental. But in hindsight, no one should have been excusing the behavior this person was admitting to. But there's this environment of utter acceptance that's been created. There's a cultic mindset that just slowly and meticulously shuts off your intuition. If you saw the docuseries The Deep End, then you saw multiple examples of Teal's followers sharing this instinctual red flag about the teachings or showing resistance or even questioning Teal. And immediately we see Teal's defenses come up. We see her mask slip. If you bring up a concern, the problem isn't Teal or what she's doing, it's you. If you question her leadership, she attacks you. She attacks. Always. She never defends. She is never able to actually take responsibility for what she says and how it's affecting other people and their actions. Someone who follows Teal ends their own life. Well, it was their parents' fault for being bad parents, not Teal's fault for insisting that taking their own life would be a way to reset their soul's experience. She's giving them permission to do something so drastic and so harmful. And since they've already gotten to the space where they don't just trust her, but they consider her a mentor and a guru, someone who's all knowing, more spiritually aligned than the Pope, and an expert on human suffering, they do it because Teal said that it was okay. But the truth of this all is, Teal isn't some alien with special knowledge of the universe or access to other entities or knowledge. She's a con artist who not just takes part of other spiritual concepts to claim them as her own, she actually plagiarizes them word for word. Now, I'm sure most of us have seen Teal's YouTube channel at some point where she spouts out a lot of her teachings, and it's how she gained most of her following. And in my opinion, it often just feels like she's reading off of like a teleprompter, which no hate to that. I am also reading off of a teleprompter, but I also wrote this script after doing hours and hours of research. And I'm not claiming to have channeled any of this or made it up on my own. But in this video I'm about to show you, the creator actually points out that Teal is literally reading from probably a book, but claiming it to be her own knowledge. If you watch this video closely, you'll be able to see her eyes shift from speaking to the camera to whatever it is she's trying to read and communicate. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me to find out that once she got herself a teleprompter, because I'm pretty sure she did, she was probably just regurgitating and reading spiritual ideas that she found online or combining them together, which is fine, but just credit your sources.
And to do something to an author, to take word for word from their publication, at least state, that you are reading it instead of trying to give the impression to the people watching that it is actually something that is your own. Because, anyway, I'm going to just start it. Let's see how we'll start with this.
Everyone knows that I have not the best vibration relative to technology. So let's hope this image turns out as good as I hope it will. Today we're going to speak to the brain. What we're going to speak to the brain about is Akashic records.
Okay. Today we're going to speak to our brain. Okay. Notice not in this publication, but today we are going to talk to our brain. So she's using these words. Okay, let's listen.
The Akashic records are a symbolic representation that the brain uses to represent the fact that every thought which has ever been thought exists. The Akashic record is the collective consciousness. It has been referred to as the mind of God, which as such happens to contain the information or the energetic vibration of every thought which has ever been thought in any and all universes that have ever been since the first division of oneness or source. It also contains a bit of future.
When I tell you that this literally made me laugh out loud, like I seriously just have to shout out the High Priestess Studio for making that video. Now, this isn't the only controversial thing that Teal does, obviously. In fact, arguably, her biggest selling point is called the completion process. She claims this process is something she discovered while in the midst of her ritualistic. This was how she was able to begin healing herself. In fact, she claims in her book about the completion process, she details the moment she discovered it while being in a deep, dark hole outside her house. But if we look back to some previous interviews she had, she actually says that she never realized she could leave until the moment she was forced to have intercourse with a dead man. And then that was the moment that she fled and drove to Salt Lake City. So, which is it, Teal? I seriously would love to hear from her an actual timeline of what she says happened and when she started using this completion process to heal herself, because I allege that she learned many of these tactics from Barbara Snow, who we established in my previous episode was one of the loudest voices during the Satanic Panic. Teal Swan claims that all trauma is connected to what happened to us as a child. So she implies that no trauma is really experienced past the age of 8. It's all connected to something that happened in our childhood. So if something happened to you in high school, college, as an adult, that's not the trauma you really need to deal with. You need to look back even further because you attracted it to yourself because of the childhood trauma that you experienced as a child. Because she claims that our souls have decided to have these experiences before we were born into this life. So all of it is predetermined. And when you do experience trauma, your soul is then split into two, and it's the dark part of you that continues to attract negative emotions and trauma. Personally, I feel like this simultaneously simplifies and complicates the idea of trauma at the same time because trauma can occur at any age. And I would argue that healing from any trauma we experience is honestly its own journey. The way you process trauma from one occurrence at one age could be completely different than processing a different trauma at a different age. Lumping it all together as it's just childhood trauma we have to unpack, or it's happening because you haven't healed your childhood trauma, is actually incredibly harmful because it blames the victim for whatever they might be experiencing as a teenager or as an adult. Well, this terrible thing happened to you not only because you chose it, but because you didn't heal yourself soon enough. And when we think about this theory that when trauma occurs, your soul splits into two, one being a dark or a shadow self, and then the other being your light self, and it's just your dark self that's attracting bad things and emotions into your life, it implies that you're not going to have a truly happy, fulfilled life until you're ready and able to reintegrate that shadow side back into yourself. And look, yes, sometimes you do need to take a look at your quote unquote dark side or your weaknesses or your triggers, just so you can fully understand them and yourself. But this is a deeply personal experience that should be done with either a professional, or it can be a very sacred and personal process that works for you. A therapist's job is to provide you with tools so that you can use them on your own day to day when these triggers and these feelings come up. But with Teal's way, she gets all the credit for your healing. And this creates a dependency on Teal and her teachings, and that alone is dangerous. So, what exactly is the completion process? It's the process of exploring your emotional state and discovering what caused that emotional state so that you can effectively process it and heal from it. So, yeah, on the surface, it sounds great. And I think a lot of us understand that in order to process emotions, we have to try to understand them. Feeling depressed is different than being depressed clinically. Feeling anxious is a very natural, normal feeling. But if you're feeling anxious every day from the moment you wake up to the time you go to bed, you might need some additional help. There could be a chemical imbalance. But Teal's way is very controversial and seems to require similar steps that Barbara Snow used to access hidden memories. It requires 18 steps to be exact, and begins, of course, with a meditation from Teal. She says that this is how you create a safe space to explore your feelings. But what this honestly does is it puts your mind in a somewhat hypnotic state so that you are very suggestible. So, I'm going to go ahead and provide a summary of my understanding of what this process is. So, as mentioned, you begin with a meditation that is conveniently sold. Yes, you need to pay for it by Teal to help you get into that safe space of suggestibility. Then you sit with your feeling and whatever feelings come up. And this so far sounds good. I think it's completely fine and healthy to learn to sit with your feelings and understand where they're coming from to release them. And through this, you move towards accepting the feeling. Again, great, because all feelings are valid. But then we get to this third step, which is inviting a memory to come in. And you're expected to fully re experience that memory. Whether it was traumatic or painful, she wants you to tap back into that memory and fully relive it. Now, the mind is a fascinating thing. We are imaginative creatures. We can see images in our head, we can conjure up ideas, we can see things in our mind's eye. I think of it like when I'm reading a book and I visualize the story as I read it in a certain way. It just naturally comes to me. And the book provides a suggestion of what the room looks like, how the characters are dressed, and then that creates an idea in my head. However, just because it's there in my mind's eye, I wouldn't consider that a memory. Just because I conjured it up. I've worked with spiritual therapists who have put me into a sort of trance and asked me to ground myself in a beautiful place in my mind's eye. And sometimes it was the same place, but other times it was different. But it was almost always some combination of landscapes I've seen or places I've wanted to visit. But it didn't mean my soul had actually been there before. So I can only speculate that this might be what is happening when one is diving into the completion process. Because you know ahead of time that you are going to experience a trauma. She tells you it's going to be difficult. She tells you you're going to experience something dark. So that's already been subconsciously implanted into your headspace before you start the completion process. And it seems like most people who go through this process seem to uncover horrendous acts of violence by someone they love. And this is known before you start the process that the people before you who have done it have uncovered something immensely traumatic like that. And it's my opinion that if you know all of this and Teal is telling you it's going to be dark and painful and difficult, that a person is more likely to conjure up those images that invoke that darkness instead of something that's happy and peaceful. I'm imagining the completion process is happening at a retreat, for example, like the ones we saw in the Deep End and heard in the Gateway podcast, where we hear people screaming as they relive the trauma. We saw people in the Deep End reenact the trauma and then had other attendees intuit what had happened to the person who's going through the completion process. We literally saw evidence of people implanting these thoughts into people's minds simply because they thought it. According to Teal and according to the rest of the attendees, if they thought about it, it's because it probably happened. So tell me, if you've been told by Teal for weeks, days, months, or even years of watching her content and reading her books, and she's been saying that the only way to heal is to unpack these awful repressed memories, and you've heard her story of trauma and the subsequent healing process she went through, and she has prepared you to go through reliving some awful trauma similar to hers, it is not difficult to see how your mind might immediately conjure up the worst thing that the mind is capable of conjuring up. There is no scientific proof that this happens, that repressed memories occur, or that the brain protects us in that way. In fact, there's even more proof that shows us that children often vividly remember the trauma that occurred to them. That's why they're traumatized. And just kind of looking at this from a more logical point of view, if in fact the brain is able to suppress harmful memories in order to protect us, which maybe in time you will discover that it can. I sometimes myself do wonder if there are things that I don't remember or perhaps have been suppressed. But honestly, who's to say? But without actual evidence, it is dangerous to jump to a conclusion like this. Furthermore, if the brain is trying to protect us from trauma, why would you ever want to be re experiencing it? And why, for goodness sakes, would you ever believe that it could be valuable to relive the very trauma that our body is trying to protect us from? It's like when someone gets into an accident and is hurt so badly that they don't actually feel anything because the brain is in survival mode, just trying to ensure that the body survives. So it stops that function of telling you what hurts. Your body is essentially in shock. Why would you ever want to feel that level of pain when your body's natural function is trying to make it so you don't feel it so that you can survive? It simply doesn't make sense to me. And from what we've been able to see, thanks to people telling their stories and seeing these documentaries, we are able to really understand how detrimental these practices can be. When I was watching The Deep End and saw the scene where people were playing the parts of someone's abusive relative and channeling messages of that were experienced, I couldn't help but think of all the acting classes I've taken where we were pushed to deep emotional depths to try to find a way to experience whatever our character was experiencing. We would act out these scenarios. We would scream, cry, yell, improvise these scenarios in order to try to open us up emotionally. It's a process called emotional memory recall. It's a way to substitute an experience that's written in the script for your character that maybe you haven't dealt with. So instead, you substitute that occurrence with something that might have happened to you in real life. So let's pretend you've never been cheated on. So you're not really sure how it's going to feel when you're acting through it and you want to act it out honestly. So you might quote unquote channel a time where you felt an immense betrayal, and you might use or fuel your performance within that scene by invoking that feeling of being betrayed. And when you're exploring these emotional spaces, ideas do come to you. Images do come to you, and you are going to sometimes dangerous and dark places. But it doesn't at all mean that you've unlocked some secret repressed memory. It means that you literally have an imagination. And no one outside of yourself is or can ever unlock something that is inherently within you. Meaning that no one can ever tell you what you've experienced. But in the completion process, Teal tells you what happened. Or worse, someone else at the retreat or seminar does it. And Teal tells them that they are really embodying the spirit of whomever your repressed memory is with, when really you're just acting things out. You're doing an acting exercise. You're just pretending. You're playing like when you were a child on the playground. This is insanely dangerous. The body is an incredibly smart machine. And something we talk about in acting a lot is how the body doesn't always know that something isn't real. If you're really able to access an emotional place, your body might react in a certain way because you're triggering some kind of physical sensation, because you're letting yourself be triggered emotionally. The easiest and perhaps most graphic example I can think of is if two actors have to do an intimate lovemaking scene and are pretending to be in love or in deep lust with each other and are acting out having intercourse. Certain bodily functions might occur, if you know what I mean, because the body doesn't really know that you're pretending. And it's the same with other emotional spaces. I've performed some very intense, angry, sad, physical, and scary scenes, and sometimes it really feels real, and it can take time for my body to relax and reset. Sometimes I've had to take weeks off just to recover from a single experience in an acting classroom. And from seeing Teal's retreats and reading the steps of her completion process, it just seems like another acting workshop, except there's no transparency on how to prepare and heal from that very experience. And I do want to say that some of these acting workshops and techniques are also highly controversial because of what they do to your psyche and your body. So, as a practitioner moves through all the steps of the completion process, from meeting the inner child with whatever feeling they have, then purifying themselves within their safe space, all the way to coming out of the meditation, they can't help but feel like what they experienced was real. They believe it was the unveiling of a repressed memory. And many of these memories lead to a damning conclusion. Far too often do people believe or are told by their, for lack of a better word, scene partner of an abusive trauma that was inflicted upon them by someone they love, a parent, a sibling, a friend. And just like Teal, because remember, Teal is also estranged from her parents, the practitioners end up estranging their family members as well. They isolate themselves, they distrust their family members, and they only trust Teal. This is exactly what someone like Teal wants people to do. If people have no resources, no family, no community, no understanding from their peers, and no one to lean on, and yet they have this cathartic but also manipulated experience, they're bound to cling to that person who provided the quote unquote healing to them. And in this case, that person would be Teal. A dependency has been created. And instead of followers gaining tools to help themselves and getting to pat themselves on the back for how they've grown and how they've changed, they credit Teal completely for their healing. And sometimes they fall even deeper into the well of Teal Swan. Teal Swan has been a spiritual guru for over 2 decades now. And somehow she keeps evading taking responsibility for the lives she's helped ruin and the death that arguably she has caused. The spiritual guru industry, and yes, I'm calling it an industry because that's what it really is at this point, it's not regulated. So when people take advice like Teal's and end up hurting themselves, whether it's taking their own life, isolating themselves from family members and friends, or ruining their finances, there's just no way to hold her accountable. All we can really do is keep talking about her and the dangerous things she says and does. Podcasts and docuseries can help. Videos like this, and especially the many other valuable videos other creators have been making over the years, are so very important. But if the goal is to expose Teal and to protect the masses from her teachings, we have to remember to do it with integrity and intention, not just to prove our own hypothesis. The Deep End docuseries received a lot of pushback because Teal was able to prove some of the misleading editing. In my opinion, she did this as a way to distract us from the other things we saw in the docuseries, like the forced water torture as a method of healing, or how she's unable to receive pushback from followers without threatening them. But when she's able to prove that some of the scenes were manipulated, she stops being the problem, and the problem becomes the documentary itself. It only adds fuel to the fire that her followers burn. That Teal is a healer, and there are other people out there who just want to take her down because she is just so powerful. They're less likely to hear any other outside perspective. So when we talk about Teal Swan, we have to check our biases a little, which I'll admit is difficult to do. There are things that she shares that resonate, but more often than not, what she says is very dangerous, misguided, and even prejudiced, in my opinion, anyways. There are times throughout this series where I've really felt a lot of empathy for Teal. There's part of me that doesn't think she is inherently bad or evil or a psychopath like so many people want to say online. Sometimes I see her as this woman who's just holding on to a lot of pain, who needs a lot of validation from very large numbers of people. There's just something in her that makes her believe that she needs people to need her. She just seems so wounded in some way. And part of me wants to sympathize with her, but then I see what she's done to people and I hear her speak and I hear how she talks to others and I see how she responds to criticism. And I find it so difficult to believe that she doesn't know that what she's doing is insidious. If people are taking their own lives because of the advice that you are giving them, change that advice. If people are leaving your retreats with more trauma and pain than when they arrive, stop holding your retreats. Take some kind of accountability. If you really wanted to help people end their suffering, you would provide resources and tangible information and usable tools that they could use in their everyday life. And if what you provided wasn't working for them, you would guide them or help them find someone who can help them. But I don't think Teal really wants that. I don't think she really wants to ease suffering. In fact, at this point, I'd argue that perhaps she wants people to suffer more. Because if other people suffer, it makes her own suffering more common and more relatable, and then she never has to look at herself. In my assessment of Teal, it's this suffering that makes her feel bonded to others. It's like trauma bonding on an incredibly massive scale. In next week's episode, we will share stories from survivors of Teal Swan, people who either went to her retreat, lost a loved one, or even used to be a part of her inner circle. And we'll officially try to answer the question, is Teal Swan a cult leader? So if you have a story you'd like to tell, please email me at letfresherin@gmail.com. Thank you so much for watching and listening today. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Do you agree with my assessment? Do you think I'm being too hard on Teal? And what's your opinion on all the things we've learned so far? I love talking with you guys in the comments and seeing your opinions, and thank you for listening to mine. I know I sometimes have a unique perspective on these situations, and I would honestly love to hear your point of view. So please share whatever you'd like to share. And I really appreciate everyone who has given me either constructive feedback or has been really kind to me in the comments. This topic has been very difficult to cover. It's been very mentally draining, and I really do want to do it right. I'm not making this content to isolate anyone or point fingers. My intention and my goal is much larger than that. I'm hoping to present new information so that if someone who is a follower of one of the leaders that I'm covering, maybe it just clicks on a little more critical thinking in their head. Maybe they'll put it on that shelf of all the reasons they have to leave or stop, or they're hanging it up with all their other red flags, and maybe at one point, they'll all fall and those followers will be able to get out and reconnect with family members and go on to live a really happy, healthy life. And I understand that there's pushback involved with that, but please know that I am trying to approach this with as much integrity and understanding as I can. And if that doesn't come across sometimes, I do apologize. I also do get very passionate. So if you do have a suggestion of a topic or a cult you would like me to cover, please let me know. And again, thank you so much for being here. Remember, stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and until next time, bye.